Are good. So obviously, talking about where we left off last time, this is not where we left off last time. This is for Graphics 3. Pay no attention, right, to the man behind the curtain there. And let's go ahead and open up where we were actually last time. So we were talking about exercise 2, basically modeling. We went through each of the steps, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and of course derived a very unique shape. Lastly, we needed to basically make 2D this situation and really start maybe even talking about some of the modeling things that we could import into Illustrator to make it a little bit more detailed, right? One of the first things that we can do is, of course, actually change the rendering, right? So if you actually just go to a basic render mode, mine's kind of all fancy right now. I've got a black background going on, and I do want to show you how to change some of those things, because what is nice about this shaded view is it does start to get some of the deeper shadows and some of the qualities of the crazy objects that we actually come up with. So if that be the case, there's actually really unique ways that we can align the line work and the rendering together perfectly. That way it actually, I mean, this still blows Escamilla's mind to this day, right? Where he's like, how did you do that? How did you get all the shade and shadow quality, but also some really great line work? Again, at the end of the day, it's about actually fooling the mind a little bit, right? We're considered draftsmen or draftswomen, right? And we draft drawings, we draft legal documents. So by all means, actually this has gotten some architects in trouble where they give a rendering to the client, they build the project, and the client sues the architecture company. Why? Because they thought it was going to look exactly like the rendering. There's a reason why we're still kind of cartoony or sketchy with our designs, because they are open to interpretation, and let's face it, if anyone's ever been in construction, things change, right? So those kind of changes are legal changes, right? A potentially lawsuit involved if you made too many changes without actually notifying the client. Don't worry, you don't have to worry about that yet, right? And most of the time you don't own your firm at the start, so there is that. But just in a basic, let's at least get some of the Make 2D. I was trying to remember where I left off last time, but I'm going to take an 11 by 17. So in my case, I'm going to just draw a rectangle and stick to the proportions. So I'm going to type in 11 inches and 17 inches, just so I can lock in that proportion. Keep in mind, for exercise 2, it's still not to any scale yet. We won't dive into scale till probably exercise 4. So we are all good there. But we've got our 11 by 17. So let's get maybe some of our steps. We talked about this last time that, you know, maybe the box has been overdone. If we don't have so many steps, and to be fair, sometimes it's kind of self-explanatory. For instance, maybe I show this or this happening first. Maybe I show the box about to go in, or I start showing things taken out. So what I'm trying to say here is we have the ability to animate some things here. Obviously not on the paper. We can't, you know, like fold the paper and make it move. I mean, don't get me wrong, some students have tried and it's kind of funny. But you don't necessarily always have to start off with the box. In fact, we may start off with this for today. And one thing I wanted to go over is that we can actually save some views, right? And will definitely become important once we start getting into the rendered view. Hopefully I don't go any longer than I should on this video, but you know, I remember some of the stuff I wanted to talk about, so, and that maybe, you know, I should let you know. So maybe that's our first step, but let's say I found this to be the most perfect view, or maybe that one, or maybe this one. Ooh, actually that one's pretty good, right? It's starting to show off some of the other parts of this object. So that's pretty good. I'm going to click on the down arrow of my perspective viewport, and you'll see that there's a couple of options here. We have set view. Normally, we have these basic kind of already laid out views, such as top, left, right, front, back. Isometric is pretty new. Even a 2-point perspective is actually kind of nice. I mean, how many of you guys have done 2-point perspective in Graphic 2? And you thought to yourself, why are we doing all this calculation when, of course, we can just set the view in the computer? However, we can actually make our own view as well. So if you clicked on named views, especially on the Mac, it'll bring up an entire new window. I believe on Windows, it's still actually a separate window that pops up. But you'll see that I have 2 already right here, so I'm going to go ahead and delete those because I don't need those for today. Not sure why I have them. But in my case, I'm going to select this snapshot or this plus sign that basically says Save As, right? So when I do that, keep in mind that I want the viewport actually activated. Keep in mind that blue means activated, right? So when I hit Save View, and I say, well, step 1, perspective. What's really nice is, of course, it saves that view, and if I accidentally move it, oh man, there's no way in the entire universe that I could ever find that exact view again unless I save it. So if I double click on that thumbnail, just like that, zooms right back into the exact spot that it is. But again, I can save unlimited times as well. Very simple trick, but I like to do that for all of them. Then make 2D, right? One at a time, very quickly. Let's say I wanted actually the same sort of view, right? Or some kind of the same layout. Maybe I would take that exact same view, and instead I'm going to use my pan view and kind of move around to my next step. Maybe I zoom out a little bit. But generally, more or less, I'm going to keep that same angle, right? So I'm going to take that again. Well, in this case, I'm just going to save the view. So I don't even have to do that view again. Obviously, if the window is still open, I can obviously save the view again. We'll say step 2. Awesome. You can, yeah. So zoom extents. There's one. Wonderful. Obviously, I'm doing this for the sake of tutorial as well. You don't necessarily have to follow exactly what I'm doing. In fact, I would encourage you do not, right? Because most of the time I'm just going over the technical stuff, not exactly per se what I find the strongest or even the weakest. So that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and save that one as well. Step 3. And maybe we get a final object. I'm a fan of kind of the 2-point perspective final object, so I'm going to move mine or make a copy and kind of put it off in the distance. That way I can zoom select like Cole was saying as well. Right, we can zoom right onto it, and it is going to maintain that view angle as well, which is pretty nice. So I'm going to go ahead and, well, I'm going to say my final object is not this one because there's not much going on there. I'm going to say this is my final object and find maybe the best view to look at that. I'm going to save that one. And let's go with the 2-point perspective, or, you know, you don't normally show the worm view, which is what this is called when you're underneath the object. It's normally called the worm view. No, most of us know the bird's eye view, but a lot of us probably haven't heard of worm view unless you took Escamiya's Graphics 1 or 2. But that's looking pretty good, so I'm going to switch this to a 2-point perspective. Sweet. And you're going to see it's going to get quite dramatic. I kind of like that drama. Really shows off the object, and I may do a hidden lines involved there. So again, I just want to save those because I might want to add a rendered view to it. So save, and let's say final. Sweet. So we have all those views, and what's nice is I can simply click on these now in order to obtain them. So what's nice about that is, again, I can just select everything, or select everything I want to make 2D. I can also hold Control or Command, in order to unclick something. Command for Mac, Control for Windows, of course. And I'm going to type in Make 2D. Awesome. One thing that hopefully I'll just say every single time, bless you, is of course make sure that you maintain source layers, especially if you've done all that work with layering. Some of you guys I've noticed you make 2D and then you're like, sir, where did all the layers go? Make sure you have that maintain layers, super important, right? Keep in mind you don't always need the hidden lines, as some of you guys are starting to realize. In my case, I'm going to go with no hidden lines for the step, but I'm going to show some hidden lines for my final, right? I mean, why not? We'll switch it up a little bit. So that's looking pretty good. And as you can see, it produced something over here. Very often I'll actually move it because I know that it's always going to make 2D in the same spot. So in order to, you know, keep myself a little bit more organized, you know, I'll make multiple spots. Step 2, same thing. Take it, make 2D. And usually by default, oh my gosh, I forgot what I was going to say. Forget about it. Probably not important if I can't remember. There we go. We've already got step 2. Let's move those down a little bit. Get them out of the way. Again, I can click on step 3. Done. Right? I don't have to rework this. I kind of did all that kind of viewing at a time, like, so I can get, at least some congruent looks. But make 2D. But sometimes you'll notice your workflow, especially me, I get distracted kind of easily, especially on the computer, that if I do step 1, step 2, step 3 with step 1, step 1, step 2, step 3 with step 2, I kind of get lost, like, oh yeah, what was I doing again? Oh yeah, make 2D. Instead of actually going find the view for all of them, make 2D for all of them, and then actually press them, right? Does that make sense? Because I was all over the place as a student. I'm like, I'm just going for broke here, right? I just want to finish. Half the time I was just learning the program in general. So, I don't know. You might be in the same boat. So if you are, right, there is other options. And last but not least, we'll get this view, and we'll actually maintain some of those hidden lines. So let's check those. To be absolutely honest with you, I do not know what tangent edges really does. I've tried it multiple times. I have a feeling it has a lot more due to curvilinear surfaces to actually obtain some of those things. So one thing I would stress, since we do have some curvilinear surfaces in here, you might try it out. Maybe it works for you. Definitely worth exploring. And the reason I say that, guys, is we don't know everything about this program, myself included. And to be fair, be a little scientist about this, right? Test your independent and dependent variables here. I tried this click this time, I tried this click last time. Hey, that actually worked out. And you may discover something about the program, or at least how it could be utilized, right? To be completely honest. So I'll go ahead and apply. Wonderful. And we'll get those views. Obviously, I need something to put into Illustrator today, so let's go ahead and talk about it. We don't need the views anymore unless I want to do that rendered view, so maybe I talk about that for a second. Maybe I do want this rendered after all. I want to show some shade and shadow. And to be fair, that's pretty good. I mean, I do have a little bit of shadow in there and a little bit of things going on. But if I really wanted to change my options here, one thing that I could do is find this little blue sphere that you see, kind of quasi-rendered, if you will. If you click on that, you'll see that there's quite a few options. To be fair, we're going to use maybe about the first 2 rows. Obviously, we have some spotlights and some different options here. But then we also have the rendering settings and the rendering preview. So if you toggle render settings, usually these are all together, so I do apologize. In my case, I like to kind of stack them. Let's see. Of course, while you're recording, this is not the greatest thing to do. It doesn't always work. As you can see, those little blue boxes come up to kind of help you out, but to be fair, for some reason while you're recording, it doesn't have always the greatest result. As you can see, it just doesn't even lock in there. But that's okay. We'll put it into my panel if I can. You'll see that you'll have this side panel that can sometimes be used, sometimes not. See what I mean? There we go. Kinda, but I just kind of put it back. Not a big deal. The view that we want to see right here is, of course, all the rendering options. And as you can see, we can change the quality, we can change all those things. And I'll dive into this a little bit more on assignment 3. But I did want to show that you don't necessarily have to have a black background like myself. Very often we actually have a white background or even a slightly gray so that we can see the object itself. Keep in mind, we can always add a transparent background, so we don't necessarily need it or not. I find that black pops the most for me. I'm not a person with very good eyesight, so the more contrast, the better for me, right? In my case, I'll use kind of a light gray today. And we can actually change the studio environment. I'll get into that a little bit. You're more than welcome to experiment. And this is exactly what I meant by experiment with some of these things. And if you're just absolutely confused, guys, again, the internet is wonderful. I'd be absolutely nowhere. I wouldn't be talking to you today if it wasn't for the internet, right? And the ability to find and problem solve for myself. But, I am always here to help. In that case, a couple things that we can do to this is change the lighting. So one thing that I like to do is actually have some spotlighting. As you can see, kind of have that spotlighting going on. But if you were to type in sun, enter, we do actually have some sun options. I'm going to turn off my sun for now. As you can see, it really changes the shadow quality. Don't get me wrong, I love the sun, but it gets kind of weird. When you get close to the horizon, it does start to make your object a little yellow. Sometimes that's warranted, right? I mean, especially if you put your building in there and you're trying to get maybe the morning or the evening light. Awesome, let's use the sunlight. However, sometimes we're just trying to light the object and I don't necessarily need it to change color. So I'll use a spotlight, right? So if you go also to those rendering settings, oh, don't click on the render box like I did. Also, I'm screen recording, so please don't freeze. Ooh, please. Are you sure you want to stop this rendering? Yes, yes I do. Didn't even want to start it. Oh gosh. I have a feeling. Honestly, if you have a Mac, the worst thing you can do is click a bunch of times. The best thing you can do is just be patient, right? So we'll view the spinning wheel of death and see what I mean. Just give it a second, right? However, if you're not screen recording, that usually goes a lot faster. But in our case, right-click on this, right? Or you sometimes click on this little tiny arrow, right? And make sure that you actually click on the settings itself. But in that case, you can click on lights and you can see what's actually activated. Right now I have a skylight, so you can actually see that, oh wow, that makes some really different options. Without the skylight, it does look kind of 1982 render view, if you will. So I typically keep the skylight on, and keep in mind you can change the color of the sun as well. But we can also add lights to this. So again, if we right click on this little piece, we'll go ahead and cancel that. Or this little light box right here is actually spotlight right there. In my case, I'm going to use all 4 views here. If I can, I've got a lot going on here. Let's take these tabs and just put them in. There we go. Let's get rid of that one for right now. Get out of here. There we go. And as you can see, I have a lot of these options already, so I'll just put them over here, such as my layers. And to be fair, I can't remember if it works just like this, to be fair, on Windows. I apologize if you're using Windows. Just kidding. But let's get some lighting on that. I have this object over here. I can use my spotlight. It works as in basically controlling the radius first, and then controlling that angle. So in my case, I kind of want the Pixar lamp angle, right? So something more like that. And as you can see, it goes on the ground. You'll notice that your ground position, especially in render view, is based on the lowest object that you have in the field. That's sometimes weird, right? If you're trying to show this object on the ground and you want to show the way that it's projecting on the ground. So one thing that we can do is turn off the ground real quick. So if you type in ground and type in ground plane, you can turn it off real quick, and you can make your own ground, right? Which I do quite often, right? So in my case, I'm just going to make my own. And sometimes that gets the job done, at least in terms of getting it just right. I kind of like a little bit of space there. It kind of makes the object feel a little bit more real, and you start to define where the object ends. So that's something you can actually do with the ground plane. It's going to automatically do it for you. But that's actually already looking pretty good for a rendered view, especially since I'm going to put some lines on it and already get some nice line weight. So I kind of like that high contrast look, but that's just me. You might have some different preferences. To be fair, we'll get into a little bit of materiality, such as, you know, glass and plastic and stone, and there's a lot of things that we can do to make this look somewhat real. But really, for today's experience, I just want to go over how to set that view, and of course how to get your first render. So in my case, I'm going to go back to my named views, or go back to this little camera, right, that you'll see there. And oh no, I must have moved something around, right, because oh, I got that worm view, remember? So in my case, maybe that is the better view for our render, or maybe that is, I'm not sure. What's nice is I can change the spotlight itself, however I can't in a rendered view. You'll notice you have to be in shaded in order to change this light, but you still can, right? What's nice is I think if it's activated and then you go into rendered view, it will show. Yeah, so that's kind of nice. So as I move the spotlight, it will change the lighting on this piece. Yeah, for some of us who just took G2, you're like, what the, you know, like I was sitting there calculating all of the shade and shadows and all the qualities and all the parallel lights when I could have just been moving a light around. It's true, but that's why you take Varrette's graphics too, right? Because we go over this just a tad. But that's looking pretty good. I like the shade and shadow quality that's going underneath, but I need to reset this view. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually, I think there is a way to restore the view, but I'm just going to go ahead and delete it, not to confuse. And delete that view and make a new one. So in my case, we'll save that one. Awesome. And we'll remake that Make 2D as well. For the sake of tutorial today, I'm just going to take a screenshot. However, you can always, man, what's Google Earth doing? Get out of here. Anyway, we'll take a screenshot. In my case, on a Mac, you can do Command Shift and the number 4. Also, don't do it while you got weird little things going on. Ah, man, get that pink line out of here. There we go. So I'll take a quick screenshot just for the alignment that I want to show today in Illustrator. So that's looking pretty sweet. And let's go back to our Make 2D to get it ready for Illustrator. In my case, I can even hide that if it's just really in the way, or if it's causing too much stuff going on. There's that 2-point perspective I want. And I want this exact view right because I do need to eventually line it up with my render. So again, holding shift is super important. Another thing I've noticed some students doing is they accidentally unshift before they click, right? So be very careful. Hold that position down, unclick the mouse first, then unclick the keyboard, right? Eventually it does become second nature. You can ask anybody who's been in this program for a year. Eventually it's like playing a piano, right? You just, unfortunately there's no haptic feedback. There's no like sounds or anything. I mean, I guess you can set accessibility in both Windows and Mac, but I don't know. Definitely have to practice. But let's get some of those steps involved. Maybe my step 1, awesome. So let's get step 1 in there. I don't have a lot of layers. I'm not practicing what I preach. I do apologize. I should be a little bit more organized during the tutorials, but I find that they do take a little bit longer. And I find it, people watch the tutorials a little bit more if they're a little bit more concise and quick, right? Nobody wants to sit on YouTube for like 3 hours watching one assignment. I'm right there with you. So I do go for speed. But as you can see, we're kind of maintaining that angle. It's looking pretty nice, right? This could probably be a little bit bigger to maintain maybe the same size of that box or that initial box. It's getting really close to the edge there. I can hear Escamilla and myself just talking about portfolio recently. Definitely don't want things too close to the edge. You want to let them breathe in that white space. And let's take that one as well. Oh, or was it this one? Either way, obviously this is for the sake of tutorial. That's looking pretty sweet. Maybe that one gets a little bit smaller to show off that unique surface. Also, the surface doesn't have to stay there. It's kind of a weird surface anyway. And to be fair, I can still rotate things. Again, this is why I can't stress enough, guys. You really want to do the drawing, the layouting, the composition really in Rhino. Now, what I would say is you could probably do the text in Illustrator. Right? Don't get me wrong, text in Rhino can be hit and miss, especially if you don't have fonts loaded or you're working on the school computer and there's like no fonts loaded, right? The bonus is I'll go over some fonts and some loadable fonts that we can do on the school computer as well in Illustrator. So there is definitely a bit more customability, but that's looking pretty good. One thing I could do and test here is I could type in picture and I can add a picture. So in my case, that screenshot that I just took, I could verify that it actually works here first. Again, I'm gonna have to hold shift to make that work. And as you can see, I accidentally got the wrong Make 2D, right? Pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I got the wrong Make 2D there. So good thing that I verified before I went all the way over to Illustrator. There's the one I need, right? No, maybe not. Is it? Yeah, I think so. Wait, no, that's not cut yet. Good thing I have this view and I can just go back. Oh no, I gotta show it. Right, so it comes back. So double click, because I did hide it. We'll go back to a rendered view. And let's just make sure we get that Make 2D. I'm gonna get some hidden lines in there, apply. And let's go back. Be very careful with your rendered view, especially if you don't have a very strong computer. There it is. So maybe that was it. Anyway, so that's looking a lot better. Let's go back to our top view. And as you can see, you can accidentally change the view of your viewports. Quite all right. If you haven't done that yet, you can go to set view and go back to your top view. Double click and it'll inactivate that view and activate it. But let's size that down. Again, make sure you hold shift. And we can make sure that it aligns here first. I can't express that enough because, well, there's this wonderful tool called scale, right? So if you type in scale and you select a part of the object, right? So often what I'd like to do is usually try to line up one piece first, right? Don't get me wrong, it is a pixelated image until we get to that rendered view. But we can also use scale, bless you, in order to reference it. So if I can take this piece and I say, well, I want this piece to line up with this piece, I can actually do it fairly easily, right? Now the bad news is the image is pretty hard to get back into Illustrator, especially exporting it. To be fair, I've heard some success with Adobe Illustrator file, not really any much success with the DWG. Unfortunately, the embed file doesn't embed, right? You'll see what I mean, but what's nice about it is it will keep the frame of this original image. So that might be useful in this case. But let's say I was ready to go. I've got my steps composed and organized. Obviously I don't, by the way. Right, they're just kind of random right now. So again, do your own work in that regard. But even in this case, you know, it's open to interpretation of like how much you want to use this image for. For instance, some students will actually use it in order to actually trace some other elements. No, shadows don't really actually have outlines, but just to kind of show what this has the capability of doing is, of course, you still have the ability to trace and add to your Make 2D. I can't stress that enough, guys, because very often you'll run into a spot, especially in architecture, where you don't know how to model it. And there's no time. Maybe there's only 3 hours left, and you don't have time to go to Professor Vered or Longoria to have us maybe answer how to model that. Draw it in Make 2D. All of us know how to draw, or at least fake it till we make it. I mean, by all means, if I missed my scale figures, I'd definitely get a polyline involved and be like, well, I'm just going to draw one real quick. And maybe that's my person, that's their head. Because everybody knows how to draw. Or should, right? So you don't necessarily have to model that every time, right? And to be fair, we can even change it there too. Again, something that in Illustrator is a lot harder and more difficult to do, right? So again, making sure that you get all those steps here is super important. I can't stress that enough. I know I've been telling each individually, some of you guys that also, so. But let's dive into Illustrator. I do have a lot more to talk about there, and I left myself 3 minutes, wonderful. We'll go over a little bit, but in our case, let's go and try that DWG, or actually, you know what? I'm gonna try the Adobe Illustrator just to kind of show you what I mean. So let's call that exercise 2, and we'll put it on the desktop for today. Adobe Illustrator. Again, we're not doing anything to scale right now, so we could do a snapshot of our current view. However, that will become important eventually if we're doing something to scale. In our case, we have Adobe Illustrator opened up. Wonderful. Let's go ahead and open up that Adobe Illustrator file. And as you can see, to absolutely nothing because, well, it's probably off in the distance over here. Awesome. So we'll take that piece. But this is exactly what I meant by it doesn't take the embedded file. You'll notice that it kind of just gave us the box and the subdivisions of that original piece. However, if I have the original document, of course we can go to File, Place, somewhere's Place. Oh my gosh, where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Place ... I've never really understood why they put ... there. But in our case, we'll take that screenshot. Make sure it's the right one. Yep. And we can actually place it in there, right? And of course, align it to the original piece that we had. However, of course, before I do this, let's make sure it's on 11 by 17 and that we get some artboard things in order anyway. This is, of course, a recap, but Control R, as in, what's the military for R? Does anybody know? I want to say redacto, refraction, anything that starts with an R. But Command R, right, of course, brings up our ruler. In our case, yeah, I want to verify that it's in inches first, and it is, right? I'm still wondering what picas are to this day. But in our case, let's change the artboard first. So File, Document Setup, and Edit Artboards. In my case, I can take already the existing one and make sure that it's within the right realm. In my case, it looks like it was actually already at 11 by 17. but let's go ahead and verify that. Awesome. Now it is 11 by 17. I'll click on really just the outside of the page and highlight everything so that I can align it to my artboard. In my case, I'll take that piece. You'll notice, if I haven't said this already, but Control or Command plus sign, you can also zoom in and zoom out. And if you haven't found out already, if you hold spacebar, you can immediately pan as well, and that's definitely a game changer. But just to kind of recap, let's align some of that. So as you can see, it's having a hard time aligning there, so I'm going to use the top left corner instead and basically align that. Awesome, and as long as I found the right ratio, you'll find that it lines just right. No longer need my outline, so I will keep that for there. And last but not least, I definitely want to take this guy and line that up. I'm going to hold shift so that it stays proportional, and of course align it to that tool. By default, it is going to be at the top, so if I wanted to, I could go to my layers that don't seem to be there. Where do my layers go? Let's go to Essentials Classic. If you still don't have your layers, right, or maybe they got misplaced, maybe you accidentally exit them, totally fine. I'm going to reset my Essentials Classic, and of course that'll come right back. In my case, I want to push that to the back, and if I haven't explained this also, you'll notice that in the layers on top, bless you, actually mean that they're on top of the drawing, right? The layers at the bottom literally are the layers at the bottom. So very often, even if I just take this image and move the entire layer back, bam, right? We have that alignment of both line weight tools and of course our image. Now we may have to dial it in. To be fair, this is a pretty pixelated image, so it actually lines up pretty well, right? We don't see a lot of the pixelization. And to be fair, we did all that alignment. We don't have to do it in Illustrator. To be fair, some of us probably know how hard it is to kind of align an image in Illustrator. Cole's shaking her head like, yep, I've been there, right? And it can take anywhere from 3 minutes to 3 hours, right? Especially if you don't just realize, oh man, I accidentally deproportionalized it, it's never going to line up, right? I accidentally didn't hold shift, and I can't express that enough, guys. If you're struggling with something for more than 30 minutes, just try it again, right? Because there might have been a step along the way that you just didn't even notice, right? And nobody needs to spend 3 hours doing something, right? By all means, that's exactly where the frustration in a computer goes. But I did want to explain some of the tools that we have available. Obviously, you guys already know that we can select the invisible box, and we can, of course, change some of these things, right? Immediately, the color of the line weight, as well as the thickness of the line weight. So again, goes without saying, we can definitely do some of those things. Some that I haven't really gotten to go over is such as like the text tool, which essentially makes a box, and it makes this kind of Pig Latin, iconicness. So we can do some of those things, and I just wanted to express that this probably is favorable in terms of different text abilities, right? I mean, you can definitely do some pretty unique things that you can't necessarily do in Rhino. So, saying step 1, step 2, and I did show you guys the noun project now. So again, I did want to show maybe how we get some of those objects in there as well, because it is kind of nice. And just in case you don't know what I'm talking about, of course, that's the noun project. I don't know if I actually got it in the recording, so I did want to make sure that I talked about that. In my case, maybe I want some specific arrows, maybe. Another thing is, well, I can actually make just about anything turn into an arrow. In fact, some of the things that I do, if I do happen to have to draw in Illustrator, which I try to avoid at all costs, I'll make it another layer. And in my case, I'm going to double click and call it my pen tool layer. I usually put that at the top, and just drag it right to the top. And very often I'll actually lock all these. The way that I did that, just in case you don't know, is you can click and drag. You can also click and drag all of these, by the way. Really helpful when you have 128 layers, right? And you're sitting there clicking 128 times. No, we just click and drag that. Of course, that works in Windows and Macintosh. Actually, I'm sure it works in Windows, doesn't it? Anybody know? You might want to verify. I can't actually promise that for Windows. But in our case, I will lock everything else and maybe make my own arrows. So in fact, I may use the pen tool or the letter P and actually draw my own line, right? I can actually use a pencil as well. And if you right click, there's actually several tools involved and several pens involved, if you will. So of course, if you use your pen tool By default, it does have something, but you'll notice I can't really see much of anything, and that's because there's literally nothing there. If I switch it, still nothing. What's going on here? Of course, let's double click my layer. Did it make anything? Let's find out. No, it did not. What's going on here? I see the little void sign. Nothing. Interesting. No, I don't want to choke this up necessarily yet to my screen recording, but okay, well, at least we can make a line. Of course, we got to give a color to that line, and we do have to give a thickness to that line. But what is nice is you can technically make your own arrows. As you can see, it's not exactly an easy task to draw something in Illustrator, so I can't stress that enough. But you know, if we do need to make our own arrows, what is nice is we do have some options under the stroke, right, and the more options of this stroke, that we can actually use arrowheads, right? So again, kind of a useful tool. We can also switch those arrows, things like that. Keep in mind that the stroke itself sometimes controls the scale, but nicely enough, we do have the ability to change the scale here. So if we wanted to make that a little bit bigger, there are some options here, right? But what is nice about this is nobody should be sitting there drawing arrows. I noticed one student last week drawing arrows in Rhino, and that's great. I mean, especially if you want just the ultimate custom arrow, right? But very often, actually, we're on a time crunch, and to be fair, there's actually quite a lot of options when it comes to arrow. I mean, shoot, there's even a guy like old-timey style 1980s toy store, right? Pointing at it. I can't recommend this pointer in any sense or scenario, but by all means, scissor cut, that might be quite useful, especially if I'm trying to show some sort of division line. And very often, actually, I can take an existing line if it's not locked. Oh, that's why my lines weren't drawing. I was in a locked layer. Oh, so that would help, obviously. Glad I could solve it, though. But, of course, if you have unlocked layers and you select something, you can always change a line itself, right? To actually have an arrowhead or this cut line, for instance. However, keep in mind there's only so much we can do. And to be fair, you could also use noun project as well, right, in order to achieve something. And as you can see, it kind of breaks the line a little bit too, so not exactly always useful, right? But again, I did want to show you just because, well, there are a lot of things we can do. However, I've noticed some of you guys having a hard time selecting certain items or pieces that you actually made already in the layer, so I did want to go over that a little bit. Obviously, if you have different layers, or maybe you accidentally don't have different layers, you can select similar objects in Illustrator, which again, I wish Rhino even had. But in our case, if you select a line, in our case it's red and has a certain thickness of 1, I can go to select, same, and actually a few options here. We can select the same stroke color. Dang, alright, it selected everything that was red. What about the same color here, right? And of course, if I go to select, same, and again, stroke color, it's going to actually select everything. Now, in our case, we actually already have that layered, but I know in some cases we're in a tight spot and we just need to, maybe we accidentally changed everything outside of a layer, or we accidentally did this and pushed it onto another layer, we accidentally made everything red. So it does happen. So I did want to mitigate some of the things that we can do, right? But in our case, this is looking pretty good actually so far. I don't want to delete the image, but I do want to delete actually that box around it. So what could I do? Well, I can select the box itself and actually give it the attribute of nothing as well. I guess you can't do that to the image anymore. That's okay, it used to. But as you can see, there's kind of this red line around it that's not exactly wanted or warranted. So I do want to get rid of it in my case, but I want to leave the image there itself. So in my case, I'm going to switch that to another layer real quick. I'm going to hide that layer and delete these lines because, well, nobody needs gigantic red lines going through the drawings. So I'm going to get rid of the border, get that back, select the image and move it back to my layer. Not too shabby. But again, we can see the alignment and what we can do with that. Obviously, we have some hidden lines in there that doesn't seem like it actually went through. Let's make that a little bigger if we can. Doesn't look like my, oh, there's my hidden lines. Sweet. Let's take those. I want to make them dashed, just in case I haven't gone over this as well. We can make these a little bit more dashed, and of course a little bit smaller as well. I'm going to go with a 0.45, much better. And I usually like to go with a 2 and 2, or a 2 and 1 even. That's too small. Let's go with a 2 and 2, and that's looking pretty nice. Actually, even a 2 and 3. Why not? Definitely not too bad. Definitely pops, but not too much in the wrong way. In fact, I would probably even go a little bit lighter than that. So in my case, I'll take all of those and just make that a little bit lighter. Maybe I want to maintain that thickness. Maybe that's too light, and that's just right. But as you can see, definitely something that will put you ahead of the game, right? At least in terms of many other schools. But already right there, not too bad. I have some line weight, I have some rendered ability involved. I could even do that to my surface. Some of you guys might be making some pretty complex surfaces, or you thought to yourself, maybe I want to add some mesh. I wouldn't go the line route for that. Again, I wanted to add this method that of course you could use a rendered drawing to of course enhance some of the things that just kind of naturally need some shade and shadow, right? And definitely the surfaces might be one of them, especially if you're trying to make some chaotic images. You make 2D and you realize half the lines are missing, right? So again, maybe use a rendered view or a rendered preview and actually splice those two together. Don't just use the render, by the way. Use both in terms of aligning those. Now keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to do that to every piece. I'm looking at Leon because last time he actually did this in Illustrator, right? Some of the color that he did, he was actually sitting there and filling in and poching everything, which is definitely commendable, but it takes a lot of time, right? I can simply get a rendered view and splice that back in. Now next time I will be going over color on Thursday, but lastly, before I can't necessarily print from this computer or for the sake of tutorial, but just on a quick hand glance, how many of you guys have never printed at the school before? Anybody? So it almost goes without saying, right, that most of us have probably definitely printed haphazardly, maybe for free, maybe on GoPrint, right? It's kind of depends on the day, right? Unfortunately, that's completely out of my control and is completely up to OTC, but I digress. We won't make it a venting video. But in my case, I do want to make sure that you know how to get the highest quality image. And in our case, what you can do is, of course, File, Save As, or Export, by the way. But in our case, in order to print, you definitely want a PDF, or in some cases, our printers only want a JPEG. Right? Does anybody run into this issue? Especially when you do a gigantic image. So I'll do it two different ways. In my case, I don't want to save to the cloud, I want to save to my computer. I want to make sure that I switch this to a PDF, right? And in my case, I'll do it on the desktop for the sake of tutorial. And I want you to notice that at the top there are some default settings. You'll notice if you want a high quality print, choose high quality print. And in my case, that's just about all I have to do. So I'm going to save in high quality. However, if I'm making a portfolio and I need it to be exactly 25 megabytes, well, there's another way I can do that. I can go to File, Save As, PDF again. And in my case, I'm going to select the smallest file size. Well, let's go with small. Just because I do want to show you actually the differences of quality, because there definitely is a difference of quality. I'm going to go with the smallest file size. Save. Yes. That was actually an error message going, hey, did you realize the quality is going to get worse? Yes, I do realize the quality is going to get worse. But we'll save that. Also, lastly, just in case you do need that JPEG, and what I mean is like the large format printers, you'll notice, or you'll hear from Juan, that the PDF takes a very long time to print for some reason, and it actually accepts JPEGs a lot easier. We can do that in Illustrator as well. So if you go to File and go to Export instead, so Export As, and we do actually have a couple more options, such as a PNG, bitmap, and in our case, we should have JPEG. Did I lie? Did I miss it? Oh, there it is. Losing my mind. But yeah, let's get a JPEG as well, and let's look at the difference of quality. I will say the larger the file, obviously the better the quality. And really the screen resolution is what controls a JPEG the most. I would say by default you do want to at least 300. If it was a hand drawing and it got bigger, I would go with 400. Right? The reason I say that here is because, well, usually this doesn't crash your computer, right? But if you're working in Photoshop at 400 DPI, your computer is probably going to crash, right? Or 450. But when you save, that could make the difference, right? So I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm gonna save it at 72, which is typical of a screen, just to kind of show you the difference. And I'm gonna export that again at 300, just to again kind of show you the difference. So export as JPEG. Let's go with 300. Hopefully I'm saving these all in the same spot, otherwise they'll all be in different places. But let's go ahead and see what those look like. There's of course the noun project, and of course Miro. And we should have a couple here. So we have the JPEGs. And right off the bat, you'll notice one is bigger than the other, right? So that should be a dead giveaway, like, wait a minute, what I'm about to run into. And look at that bad boy. This is why you don't ever print from Photoshop, by the way, and it's a bad habit too. That is of course at the 72 DPI. Let's take a look at the 300. A little bit better, right? I mean, we could look at those side by side even, right? And it's a night and day difference, right? So obviously the higher quality goes a long way, and I can't express that enough. Keep in mind the printer is only capable of 600 DPI. So even if you're just kind of a stickler for perfection, keep in mind 600 is the max, right, for most printers. To be fair, our large format printers are 1200. I don't see anybody writing it down, so maybe you just have really good memory like myself. But it does come in handy eventually that you want quality. I know some of us are quite the perfectionists, and we only settle for quality. I can definitely commend that, and I'm that way as well. And I can't tell you how many times I fix students, sir, why is my drawing so pixelated? Well, it's because you didn't write anything down in computer graphics, right? And you were maybe not paying attention. But let's check out the PDFs as well. And I think mine actually saves it to a different PDF style. So usually by default, you really can't tell between these two, right? So you'll notice that I saved one in small, and then I saved one at sort of the larger. And let's see if we can actually tell. So if we actually click on the Get Info, if you're on Windows, you can right click and go to Properties to find this information as well. That's obviously the small one, 396, and let's right click on this one. Oh, actually this is a small one, so really half the difference. And guys, I know this maybe is not really what you're worried about, but if you're working on portfolio right now, this could be a huge deal, right? Especially if I'm bringing in images that I've already edited. Make sure you're saving them down to the best quality, but still the smallest file size. And what I mean by that is, let's take a look at these. And sometimes you could tell the difference. I don't think we'll actually be able to tell the difference here. So if you look at the PDF, notice how no matter how much I zoom in, does it ever pixelate? There's a reason why we print in PDF, because it is a vector coding, right? It is not a rastered image. It is not pixelated whatsoever. And get this, the small file size is not pixelated either. I can't zoom in as much, but actually this is actually the big one. I don't know why it says small. But I will be able to zoom in a little bit more because of that larger file size, right? But keep in mind, there's not a lot of loss of quality, even though I needed a smaller file size for that PDF. Again, I know this kind of pertains more to if you're in D3 or D4, right? But just kind of keep that in mind. Normally students kind of have to figure this out on themselves, and I always kind of feel bad because there's a lot to computers that, to be fair, I wasn't even taught. I kind of learned on my own this stuff and realized, oh my gosh, we can make portfolios be 50 pages and still actually 10 megabytes, right? And there's definitely some ways to do that without reducing quality. So I did want to make sure that I went over that. However, I've gone 20 minutes over, so I will leave that for today. That will be exercise 2. However, any questions about Illustrator, or maybe want to recap on that at all? Maybe something that they're trying to do right now that they just have a question about. The whole class might have a question about it as well. So. Nothing at all? See a lot of head shaking? That's okay. All right, we'll end it there for today.